C.H. Spurgeon preached this message on July 21st, 1861, at the Metropolitan Tabernacle. It is entitled, Jacob's Waking Exclamation. The text is in Genesis 28 and verse 16. And Jacob awakened out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. Through his own foolish wisdom, Jacob had been compelled to leave his father's house. Perhaps we are scarcely able to judge of the sorrowful feelings which this banishment would beget in his soul. Here we go from one Christian home to another. If we leave the parental roof, we may still hope to sojourn where there is an altar to the Most High God, and where we can still unite with worshippers who fear His name. Not so in Jacob's case. The family of which he was a member was the only household in the land that worshipped God, or if there were some few others, probably they were unknown to one another, and as far as Jacob's knowledge would go, he was fully assured that all the way from the place where he left his father until he arrived at Padan Aram, he would not meet with a single person who feared the God of heaven. He was passing from one oasis to another across a burning sand. We may compare him to a swallow, which for the first time leaves our shore to find no rest until it has passed with weary wing the long leagues of purple sea. You must know, too, that the prevalent notion of the heathens among whom Jacob dwelt was that their gods had only local authority. That, for instance, the god of Gaza was not the god of Ascalon. The god of Beersheba would not be the god of Bethel. Their deities were gods of the hills and not of the valleys, and it may be but just possible that from great connection with the heathen, Jacob may have failed clearly to recognize the fact that his father's God was not like their gods. So in leaving his father's house, there may have been this troublous thought rising in his mind that he was also leaving his father's God, that now his prayers would scarcely be heard, that he should be an alien from Jehovah's land, and cut off from the congregation of the blessed. Jacob was not at this time a full-grown believer, but he was a babe in grace. His ready yielding to his mother's craft proves his want of advanced piety, and it is no trifling thing for a weakling to be taken from the nurture of home and cast alone upon a world unfriendly and ungenial. Happy was it for the fugitive that his Lord's compassion tracked his way even when he knew not that God was there. Blessed was the dream which assured him that Jehovah's wing had covered his stony bed, as really as it guarded his softer couch in Isaac's tent. The truth seemed to surprise him, but oh, how sweetly it must have yielded consolation. Surely, said he, and he opened his eyes to new light, as though he knew that the night of distress had passed, and that a day of confidence had begun. Surely God is in this place, and I knew it not. I would address you this morning upon a topic which may perhaps be as useful to us as to Jacob, if God the Holy Ghost shall but enable me to preach and you to hear. O thou that art everywhere, be specially here now. Be thou in this place, and may we know it, and tremble in thy presence. I shall speak on 3 points. First, the omnipresence of God, the doctrine of it. Secondly, a recognition of that omnipresence, or the spirit which is necessary in order to discover the presence of God. And thirdly, the results of a recognition of this omnipresence, or the practice which is sure to spring out of the conviction that God is everywhere. First, then, the doctrine of God's omnipresence. He is everywhere. In the early Christian church there was a wicked heresy which for a long while caused great disturbance and exceeding much controversy. There were some who taught that Satan, the representative of evil, was of co-equal power with God, the representative of good. These men found it necessary to impugn the doctrine of God's universal power. Their doctrine denied the all-pervading presence of God in the present world, and they seemed to imagine that we should of necessity have to get out of the world of nature altogether before we could be in the presence of God. Their preachers seemed to teach that there was a great distance between God and His great universe. They always preached of Him as the King who dwelt in the land that was very far off. Nay, they almost seemed to go as far as though they had said, Between us and Him there is a great gulf fixed, so that neither can our prayers reach him, nor can the thoughts of his mercy come down to us. Blessed be God, that error has long ago been exploded, and we as Christian men, without exception, believe that God is as much in the lowest hell as in the highest heaven, and as truly among the sinful hosts of mortals as among the blissful choir of immaculate immortals, who day without night praise his name. We believe that he filleth heaven and earth and hell, that he is in the very space which his creation seems to claim, for creatures do not displease God, and even the space which is occupied by his handiworks is still filled with himself. The rocky bowels of the unsearched-out depths are full of God. Where the sea roars, or where the solid granite leaves no interstice or vacuum, even there is God, not only in the open place and in the chasm, but penetrating all matter, and abounding everywhere in all, and filling all things with himself. In him we live and move and have our being, and in him are all things, and by him all things consist. Yet, while we receive the doctrine, it is well sometimes to enlarge upon it, not so much for the sake of argument, as to make the truth stand out the more clearly to our mind's eye. Let us remember, then, that in the three kingdoms God is everywhere. In the kingdoms of nature, of providence, and of grace, we may say of each spot, surely God is in this place. He is everywhere in the fields of nature. Go, if you please, to secluded parts. Walk through the forest glades, where the virgin moss presents a delicate carpet for human foot, where the deer starts up affrighted by the intrusion of an unexpected visitor, where the wild bird scarcely flies from you, because as yet it is not familiar with the cruel face of man. As you walk among the intertwisted boughs, the natural arches of God's own temple, which he himself hath builded, without toil of hewer of stone or dauber of clay, if you be a true Christian, you will be compelled to say, the calm retreat, the silent shade, with prayer and praise agree, and seem by thy sweet bounty made for those who follow thee. You will solemnly exclaim, surely God is in this place. Nor will you be alone in your thought, for every waving flower bell will bear witness to the fact, and the insect humming in the breeze, and the glossy beetle creeping along the sere leaves that lie beneath your feet, relics of many a winter's slaughter among the verdant groves, and the birds that are warbling among the trees, will every one of them bear witness that surely God is there. In fact, if there be one spot more than another where the consciousness of God's presence will strike the heart of the awakened man, it will be where other men are not, but where he himself is alone the only worshipper of God, save as creation joins in his strain. But you must remember, too, that if you go to the haunts of men, where they crowd and congregate together, that God is there. Go to one of the abutments of London Bridge, and stand a moment gazing at the throng as it hurries by, thousands and tens of thousands in an hour. On they sweep, the riches of nations grinding the roadway, and multitudes of men, women, and children wearing away the granite pavement. God is there, though forgotten by most of them, who are thinking only of the world and of its toils, forgetting that there is one above them who looks on all, and one within them who inhabiteth all space. Let not you and I forget, but let us say, God is there, in every drop of blood that is circulating through the veins of the passengers, in every flush that is on the cheek, in every pulse that throbs or breath that heaves. The very fact that they are fed and clothed and are in existence will bear you witness that surely God is in that place, and thoughts of awe may soon come crowding o'er your mind, and you may find yourself as much alone with God in crowded Cheapside, or in the thronging Borough or noisy Whitechapel, as though you were far away, alone on the wild prairie, or in some desert of Africa, where footprint of man could not be perceived. Verily, God is in this place. Then fly with the white sail across the deep, and as you skim the foaming billows, if your soul be right within you, you will say, surely God is in this place. And when the storm comes on, and the thunder rolls like drums in the march of the God of armies, and the skies seem to be wounded with the flashings of his glittering spear and the tremendous lightning, you may say in the midst of the storm, as your bark reels and rocks, and is tossed like a sea-bird upon the billow, surely he holdeth the waters in the hollow of his hand, and God is here. And when you have landed, and calm comes on, and the fair white cloud sails slowly through the air, sailing gallantly in the abated breath of the wind, when everything comes out all fresh and green from the last shower, and there is a clear shining after the rain and the storm, and profound peace after the noisy hurricane, you may say then, with refreshed enjoyment, surely God is in this place. But I need not continue in such a strain as this. Ye shall go where ye will. Ye shall look to the most magnificent of God's works, and ye shall say, God is here, upon thine awful summit, O hoary Alp, in thy dark bosom, O tempest cloud, and in thy angry breath, O devastating hurricane. He makes the clouds his chariot, and rides upon the wings of the wind. God is here. And so in the most minute, in the blossom of the apple, in the bloom of the tiny field flower, in the seashell which has been washed up from its mother deep, in the sparkling of the mineral brought up from darkest mines, in the highest star, or in yon comet that startles the nations, and in its fiery chariot soon drives afar from mortal ken, great God, thou art here, thou art everywhere, from the minute to the magnificent, in the beautiful and in the terrible, in the fleeting and in the lasting. Thou art here, though sometimes we knew it not. Let us enter now the kingdom of providence, again to rejoice that God is there. My brethren, let us walk the centuries, and at one stride of thought let us traverse the earliest times when man first came out of Eden, driven from it by the fall. Then this earth had no human population, and the wild tribes of animals roamed it at their will. We know not what this island was then, save that we may suspect it to have been covered with dense forests, and perhaps inhabited by ferocious beasts. But God was here, as much here as he is today. As truly was he here then, when no ear heard his footfall as he walked in the cool of the day in this great garden, as truly here as when today the songs of 10,000 rise up to heaven, blessing and magnifying his name. And then, when our history began, turn over its pages, and you will read of cruel invasions and wars which stained the soil with blood, and crimsoned it a foot deep with clotted gore. You will read of civil wars and intestine strifes between brother and brother, and you will say, how is this? How was this permitted? But if you read on, and see how by tumult and bloody strife liberty was served, and the best interests of man, you will say, verily, God was here. History will conduct you to awful battlefields. She will bid you behold the garment rolled in blood. She will cover you with the thick darkness of her fire and vapor of smoke. And as you hear the clash of arms, and see the bodies of your fellow men, you say, the devil is here. But truth will say, no, though evil be here, yet surely God was in this place, though we knew it not. All this was needful after all. These calamities are but revolutions of the mighty wheels of providence, which are too high to be understood, but are as sure in their action as though we could predict their results. Turn, if you will, to what is perhaps a worse feature in history still, and more dreary far. I mean the story of persecutions. Read how the men of God were stoned and were sawn asunder. Let your imaginations revive the burnings of Smithfield, and the old dungeons of the Lollards' Tower. Think how with fire and sword and instruments of torture the fiends of hell seem determined to extirpate the chosen seed. But remember, as you read the bloodiest tragedy, as your very soul grows sick at some awful picture of poor tortured human flesh, that verily God was in that place, scattering with rough hands, it may be, the eternal seed, bidding persecution be as the blast which carries seed away from some fruit-bearing tree, that it may take root in distant islets, which it had never reached unless it had been carried on the wings of the storm. Thou art, O God, even where man is most in his sin and blasphemy. Thou art reigning over rebels themselves, and over those who seem to defy and to overturn thy will. Remember always that in history, however dreadful may seem the circumstance of the narrative, surely God is in that place. You may say that yon nation depended for its welfare upon a woman's will, or that its destiny hinged upon a child's life, that this dynasty rose and fell at the will of some far-famed adventurer, that another nation was rocked to its very center by the fanaticism of a foolish pretender. We will grant you all this, for who denies the second cause when he vindicates the first? But let me say, more present is God than even man himself. More truly is he king than the kings of the earth. More certainly is the Lord a man of war than even warriors themselves. In everything in the page of history, from the moment of its first unrolling till the last of the 7 seals shall be loosed, and the book shall be read out before men and angels, you will have to say, God was in it all. But you will please to recollect that while this is true of history in the mass, it is also true of it in the detail, and with reference to yourself and your own lot, God is there. You had a fire by which you lost your all, but God was there. By some fortunate circumstance, as you call it, you rose in life. God was there. But by a reverse, as you name it, you soon fell back again. God was there. There has nothing happened to you but what has been under his knowledge, his superintendence, and his ordination. Do not, I pray you, forget yourself while you are thinking of nations and of kingdoms, for it is as true of a gnat that God supports it in life as it is of an angel, and God is as certainly in the creeping of the aphid upon a rosebud as in the tumble of an avalanche from the mountain. He is in all things. He is in you. He is in your circumstances today. Take the thought home, and may God grant that it may have its due effect upon your minds. In providence, then, we may say, surely God is in this place. But now we come to the third great kingdom of which the truth holds good in a yet more evident manner, the kingdom of grace. In yonder province of conviction, where hard-hearted ones are weeping penitential tears, where proud ones who said they would never have this man to reign over them are bowing their knees to kiss the sun lest he be angry, where rocky adamantine consciences have at last begun to feel, where obdurate, determined, incorrigible sinners have at last turned from the error of their ways, God is there. For were he not there, none of these holy feelings would ever have arisen, and the cry would never have been heard, I will arise and go unto my Father. And in yonder province which shines under a brighter sun, where penitents look with joy to a bleeding Savior, where sinners leap to lose their chains, and oppressed ones sing because their burdens have rolled away, where they who are just now sitting in darkness and in the valley of the shadow of death have seen the great light, God is in that place, or faith had never come, and hope had never arisen. And there, in yonder province, brighter still, where Christians lay their bodies upon the altar as living sacrifices, where men with self-denying zeal think themselves to be nothing, and Christ to be all in all, where the missionary leaves his kindred that he may die among the swarthy heathen, where the young man renounces brilliant prospects that he may be the humble servant of Jesus, where yonder work-girl toils night and day to earn her bread rather than sell her soul, where yonder toiling laborer stands up for the rights of conscience against the demands of the mighty, where yonder struggling believer still holds to God in all his troubles, saying, Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. God is in that place, and he that has eyes to see will soon perceive his presence there, where the sigh is heaving, where the tear is falling, where the song is rising, where the desire is mounting, where love is burning, hope anticipating, faith abiding, joy overflowing, patience suffering, and zeal abounding, God is surely present, in the temple of the human heart, consecrating it unto himself. In all these three kingdoms, then, my brethren, let us never forget that God is in this place. I shall turn from this point when I have just made the remark that we are still so apt to think that God is not here. You remember that splendid picture which God himself gives. Heaven is my throne, and earth is my footstool. You have seen, perhaps, the drawings of those wonderful statues which amid the ruined temples of Egypt lift their heads into the very clouds. They sit upon their awful thrones continually. Men of common stature reach no higher than the pedestals of their feet, while these gigantic ones tower upwards into the very sky. Now consider these to be but a minute representation, and let the colossal figure of deity rise before your mind. Heaven is his throne, and there he sits. Earth is his footstool, and here are his feet. While higher than angels fly is the head of the all-glorious one. We cannot comprehend the Lord at all, but we may think of him as he represents himself to us. He does it, you know, under human representations. Let us then get the human representation into our mind. He is greater than the greatest thought, his head higher than heaven, his feet lower than the deepest hell. Earth is his footstool, heaven his throne. Do not let us think that he is ever absent here. For if his face be seen in heaven, the skirts of his garments are trailing over the whole earth. We are never at a distance from him. He is here, there, and everywhere, with you and with me, very present at every time and in every circumstance. I cannot bring the truth out more clearly than that. I therefore leave it to pass on to the second head. But how are we to recognize this presence of God? What is the spirit which shall enable us constantly to feel it? The presence of electricity is very soon discovered by those bodies which are susceptible of its action. The presence, for instance, of iron in a vessel is very soon detected and discovered by the magnetic needle. There is an affinity between them. That carnal men should not discover God here, I do not wonder at. That they should even say there is no God is no marvel, because there is nothing in their nature akin to him, and therefore they do not perceive him. They lack all the affinity that can discover his presence. To commence, then, if you would feel God's presence, you must have an affinity to his nature. Your soul must have the spirit of adoption, and it will soon find out its Father. Your spirit must have a desire after holiness, and it will soon discover the presence of him who is holiness itself. Your mind must be heavenly, and you will soon detect that the God of heaven is here. The more nearly we become like God, the more sure shall we be that God is where we are. To a man who has reached the highest stage of sanctification, the presence of God becomes a more sure fact than the presence of anything else beside. In fact, he may even get to such a state that he will look upon the fields, streets, inhabitants, and events of the world as a dream, a passing background, while the only real thing to him will be the unseen God which his new nature so clearly manifests to him, that his faith becomes the evidence of things not seen, the substance of things which sense cannot perceive. Likeness to God is first necessary for the clear perception of his presence. Next, there must be a calmness of spirit. God was in the place when Jacob came there that night, but he did not know it, for he was alarmed about his brother Esau. He was troubled and vexed and disturbed. He fell asleep, and his dream calmed him. He awoke refreshed. The noise of his troubled thoughts was gone, and heard the voice of God. In solemn silence of the mind, my heaven, and there my God I find. More quiet we want, more quiet, more calm retirement, before we shall well be able, even with spiritual minds, to discover the sensible presence of God. But then next, Jacob had, in addition to this calm of mind, a revelation of Christ. That latter, as I have said in the exposition, was a picture